thank you for joining us. This is the Future Successful Grant application. We're really focusing on the community grant cycle grant application here. It's just going to be me today. Greg is out, but we will walk you through first just a bit of background on YVCF, particularly as it pertains to the community grant cycle, what's relevant for you to know when submitting these applications, and then a bigger picture overview of the community grant cycle, where it came from, what we try to fund, and our goals with that program. And then we can kind of get into this year's application, what's new for 2026, the difference between our general operating grant and program grant, and who would need to apply for each one. And then we will get some tips and tricks. And then I can show you where you can find all this on the website itself. And then we'll go through the rubric, which has been updated a little bit this year. Some tips on finances, which is an area where we see some folks trip up a little bit on what documents need to be uploaded, what our reviewers are looking for there, and then show you the portal for the 2026 application. It's the same portal as it's been in the past, but those of you who filled it out know that it can be kind of finicky. So we can walk through that and make sure that we can give you some tips to be successful in that portal. And then if you have any questions, we'll have time at the end. So first, just a little background on us. Community Foundation. The Amber Community Foundation was founded in 1979. It was formed by a group of individuals who got together to save the community college, which is now CMC. They thought it was a really important resource to our community, banded together, were able to raise funds and save it. And then they were like, well, that was great. What can we do next? And so that was obviously before my time. But then they started looking to other projects, and that's kind of how the Community Foundation was born. Today, we work across Routt and Moffat counties, serving nonprofits throughout both regions. And a community foundation is a little bit different from a private family foundation in that we try to support the full patchwork quilt of nonprofits. We, as a community foundation, can't have a single donor make up more than 30% of our assets, which means we have a lot of different folks who are contributing, and they have a lot of different interests. So we're trying to support that full varied interest of the community and not just a few specific interests of a couple individuals. So like most of you, we're a 501c3 nonprofit, and we try to support kind of the patchwork quilt that makes our community great. So kind of have four main pillars of what we do. Tim might not like me continuing to use these as we tweak them a little bit, like every other nonprofit does. But the first is strengthening nonprofits. This is something that Greg and I are primarily responsible for. We have our trainings, which a lot of you attend. This is one of them, but we have them for a lot of different types of skills that you would want to have in your nonprofit wheelhouse. So finance trainings, board trainings, marketing trainings, things like that. We also do our grants as part of our strengthening nonprofits. So it's kind of two buckets. One is training and one is funding. And so we have our grant cycles, our competitive grant cycles. We run 5 annually. This is the one that reaches the most nonprofits. We have a few others that are kind of issue area focused that I'm happy to answer questions on, because I know a couple people have been asking about that. So we can do that at the end as well. And then we offer one-on-one support as well. So if you have questions that come up throughout the year, Greg and I could be a resource. We have the time to dig into issues that others might not. So feel free to reach out if you ever have a question about your nonprofit, and we'll do what we can to share resources back to you. The next pillar is impactful grant making. That is the money going out. Again, that's kind of Greg and I's side of this, making sure that we're reaching nonprofits. We practice trust-based philanthropy here at the Community Foundation. So rather than looking over your shoulder, we try to build a relationship where we know that you're doing the work in the best way possible. That's why we try to encourage general operating grants, not just through our community grant cycle, but with all of our DAF holders as well. And then meaningful philanthropy is another pillar of ours. This is how we're able to do all of that impactful grant making and strengthening of nonprofits. That's the relationships we have with donors in our community and funders on the Front Range that allow us to give that money back out. And then building community, this is what some people would call the big BHAGs, big, hairy, audacious goals. These are the long-term forward-thinking projects that we want to invest in. So things like disaster recovery, mental health, transportation, affordable housing, those longer-term kind of solutions-oriented goals of our foundation. So we always try to keep our ear to the ground on what's going on there. And if you ever have something that you feel like fits into that and you want to connect with us on it, we are open to it. So to get into our community grant cycle, we ran the largest competitive grant cycle in Routt and Moffat counties. Last year, we granted out just over $700,000 to 89 applicants. We had 97 applicants. So while it is competitive grant making and not all of the applicants receive full funding, we do like to say that we are able to fund the majority of the applicants and the majority of nonprofits. So these funds are raised every year by the Community Foundation. We don't know how much we have to grant out until we get really to our funding day, essentially, and how much we've raised at that point. And the reason we're able to raise these funds through community members and through our partnership at the Steamboat Resort is because the people who are giving appreciate the long, rigorous process that is this grant cycle, where we can learn about the strengths and needs of nonprofits, and they really appreciate that we're kind of looking into the work that nonprofits are doing and having a touch point with them through this grant making, and it helps them learn more about the nonprofits as well. So our job today is to set you up for success so that you can wow grant reviewers. Greg and I are not reviewers, so if you ever have questions, you can certainly bounce them off of us. We're kind of the liaison between the applicants and the reviewers themselves. So our review committee is made up of 40 to 50 community members who volunteer between 40 and 80 hours of time every summer to review 30 to 40 applications, go on site visits. And so you're able to reach a really large number of people with these grant applications, and we hope that that is helpful in and of itself as well. Then I'm putting this pie chart up here, not as a vision test, but just to show that we really do try to fund every type of nonprofit. This is the sectors that we grant to. Health and Human Services is this really big chunk here, which a couple years ago we said that's lumping a lot of different types of work together. So we've broken it out a little bit. That is the largest chunk of what we are giving through this cycle. But if you break it down to the human services, mental health and crisis intervention, healthcare, poverty and basic needs, it's a similar size chunk as everything else. Don't worry too much about what sector you fall in. A lot of nonprofits fall into multiple. This is just a way for us to make sure that we're not only granting to one area, whether that be environment or youth development. We want to make sure that we're supporting all of the nonprofits because we know that the work together is what makes our community work really well. What's new for 2026? Not much. We didn't change the application a lot this year. So those of you who filled it out last year will find that the questions are all the same. Maybe like a little bit of clarification and wording on a few of them, but not a bunch of new questions. But we did update our scoring rubric, particularly around the finance scores. So both applicants and reviewers were asking for a little bit more detail and clarification around what we're being scored on for the financial review. It's hard because we're looking at an organization's budget of maybe an all-volunteer organization with an annual budget of $12,000 to a really large organization with a multi-million-dollar budget, right? So we wanted to find a way where reviewers can look at both of those and have an objective rubric to work off of, and hopefully that'll help you all as well in putting together your financial documents for this. The other thing that's changed is an eligibility requirement. I don't think it pertains to anybody in this room, but to be eligible to apply, an organization must have at least one full year of operating history and financials. That's just because we saw a few startups every year applying and not being funded, and so rather than wasting the time of those organizations, we're directing them to other sources for seed funding. That's not really what this is for. This is for established nonprofits who have been doing good work in the Valley. This one has, I don't like those. So general operating versus program grants. This grant cycle is really set up to support organizations with general operating dollars. We know those are the hardest funds to raise. And they're the most needed by most nonprofits. We know that from experience and from data. And so we really try to make that the primary focus of this. So you can use them for whatever you want. General operating grants are open to pretty much every organization unless you have an annual operating budget of more than $1 million. If you do have an operating budget of over $1 million, we felt that the scales were really tipped in those organizations' favor over the years, because a lot of those larger organizations have a full-time grant writer on staff versus a smaller organization, which is probably having a volunteer board member write their application. So to try to even the playing field a little bit, we ask that they apply for a program grant. This does not need to be for a new program. You don't have to come up with a different program if you have a large operating budget. It can be a program that you have, but another reason that this is helpful is $10,000 kind of seems like a drop in the bucket for a multi-million-dollar organization. But that $10,000 could be impactful for a program that costs $200,000 a year to run, right? And so it helps the reviewers see the impact of those dollars as well, so that it's not just lost. And it helps even the playing field a little bit. So organizations of different sizes. Additionally, faith-based organizations are required to do a program grant. These funds are not allowed to be used for religious purposes because we're raising the dollars from a large variety of different donors. This is the best way to respect donor intent around that. 2 years ago, if you operated outside of Routt and Moffat County, you had to apply for a program grant as well. We found that reviewers were being very confused by that because most organizations were applying for a general operating grant restricted for Routt and Moffat County as their program. So rather than having you do a program grant, you can apply for a general operating grant if you operate outside of Routt and Moffat counties, but you just need to explain how you plan to restrict those dollars to Routt and Moffat counties. So whether that is an accounting system you have in-house, a practice you already do, a program that you run in the counties that doesn't operate outside of Routt and Moffat, we just ask for, it's a short 150-word answer on how you're going to restrict those funds. If you are eligible for general operating, you can apply for a program grant. We don't recommend it in most cases because why would you restrict yourself to a program that if something happens and you're not able to run it, now you can't spend those dollars. So you're putting limitations on yourself that you don't need to. It's better to have those general operating dollars. Occasionally, we've seen a few organizations where it does make sense for them to apply for a program grant, but if you are an organization with a budget under $1 million and you're not faith-based, we recommend you reach out to either me or Greg before you apply for a program grant, just so we can let you know whether or not it makes sense or will help your application stand out to reviewers. Any questions so far? Any questions online? No? Okay, good. So keys to successful application. The first point on here, review committee members, as I mentioned earlier, are volunteers. So you want to be respectful of their time and aware of their time. They're looking at 30 to 40 applications all in a row, right? And so it's a lot of time. So make sure that what you're putting into that application is relevant, is answering the question, and is helping them understand what you do. One thing to avoid in that regard is jargon or complicated terms that these volunteers might not know because they don't work in your industry. Try to keep it simple and straightforward and really tell your story about what you do. You don't need to repeat information in another question. Every single question on the application is slightly different. There are a few that sound similar. If you're unsure of the difference between them, feel free to reach out to me or Greg or look at the rubric, because each scored value on the rubric refers to what question they're looking for that answer. So that might help kind of clarify a little bit. But if you've already answered part of a question in another one, you can always say, refer back to question. The other piece of this, respecting their time, is remembering that these volunteers volunteer year over year. We do our best to rotate what applications they're seeing. It's a big fun math game to get 40 reviewers, 30 different applications to review that they haven't reviewed in the last couple of years. But inevitably, a few of them probably will be reviewing the same organization. So don't fully copy paste from last year's application to this year's application. Update some things. Now, obviously, like if your mission hasn't changed, copy paste your mission and your vision, but you can always change a little bit what you're talking about, or even just change the order of the sentences. Try to pull something that is a little bit buried in your description from last year, a little bit higher up, so that the reviewers have that top of mind, or you're highlighting something different for them. So those are kind of the key tips for respecting their time. Another thing is funding is competitive, so show impact. Evidence is something that you see a lot in our rubric. And evidence can be a lot of different things for different organizations. Obviously, we're looking at all types of work. So for some people, it might be numbers based. For other people, it might be testimonials based. Your evidence doesn't have to be quantitative, and your reviewers are going to be made up of people who are compelled by different things. So try to show that impact in more than one way if possible. So if you have a numbers person reading your application, is there something that they can glean from this? If you're not working with a lot of clients, but you're working really in depth with those clients, tell them how many hours you spend with each client. If you're working with a lot of people, you can then talk about the high numbers of people that you're able to impact as well. But then also try to do something for the person who's a stories or heartstrings person, and give them a little testimonial or a little story of how you were able to change students' life through a mentorship program, or how the community choir event is able to reach young students now, which it wasn't able to do in the past. And that's a fun story of how you're pulling in new people and you're just showing impact in different ways. So it's a lot of different ways to do that, but yeah, I always try to remind people it's not just about hard data, and I know it can be tricky if you work in something that feels a little bit squishier to come up with a hard number, so feel free to add in those qualitative stories. Remember what you do is important. So this grant cycle is using charitable money to support the kind of work that all of you do. We know that your work is important. And we don't want you to forget that as you're putting this together and trying to like force an answer. Just remember the reason behind why you do what you do, and let that shine through, because that is what the reviewers are looking for. What is this impact you're putting out into the community? Why is what you're doing important? You know it, so try to find a way to tell them. One thing to highlight there too is with the site visits, we have reviewers come in from all different backgrounds and all different walks of life. They may come across, we do our best to train them, a little bit intense at first, but they are there because they care about the work you do. And most of them always walk out with you in mind as they come into our final funding decision as an organization that they want to champion. So even if somebody comes across a little abrasive or is asking a question that was answered in your application, remember they've read a lot of applications and they're doing their best, and they are there to champion you and learn about your work. So we like to give that caveat now, just so you're aware of it. And finally, just be yourself, stand out. This is kind of twofold. We want to see that you work well with other organizations. It's really important that you're not operating in an echo chamber. So we want to see how you collaborate with whether it's other nonprofits or government entities or businesses, how you collaborate with other actors in the community. That's very important. But how are you also filling a niche that those actors aren't? And that's kind of the little balancing act that you're doing there. Make sure you're not operating in that echo chamber, but also tell us why you have to continue to do what you do in order to carry out your mission. So I'm going to take you to our website just so you can see a lot of this information that I'm sharing today. Not all of it is on our website. And so this is a good place to go if you have questions or forget anything that came up today or feel like something wasn't answered. It may be on here. So a couple things to highlight here. This is under nonprofits funding opportunity. I don't know why I link here. Funding opportunities, community grant cycle. It's right up top there. The eligibility guidelines up top, we already kind of walked through those. But the main thing that changed this year is that year operating and financial history, and then the updating scoring rubric, which we'll get into in a little bit. There's all of the information we walked through on program grants and general operating here. And then the important dates over here, this is important to look at. So our applications close on Monday, June 1st, the last date to reach out to me and Greg for feedback on your application from last year that we have from reviewers. Like the what category you scored lowest on. We're happy to provide any of that information, or questions about your grant for this year, whether that's reviewing a specific question that you think you want us to have eyes on your answer, if it's questions about whether or not you should apply for a program grant or a general operating grant. The deadline for that is Friday, May 22nd. That's about 10 days before the applications close. After that, we can only really provide technical assistance just based on capacity. So if you do have questions over the next couple of weeks, we really encourage you to reach out. And if you want our eyes or feedback on anything, we're happy to do that. As I said, we're not reviewers, so we kind of have the luxury of trying to set you up for success. And then July 30th to August 21st is when the site visits will be scheduled. A review committee member will reach out to you about this, probably in early July. If you haven't heard from a review committee member by July 10th, reach out to me or Greg and let us know. They do a pretty good job, but obviously they're juggling a lot, so the balls might get dropped or they could be emailing the wrong person. So we just want to make sure those don't slip through the cracks. While we're here, I'll talk a little bit about the site visit and why we do it. So we don't want you to live or die by the words in your application. Our site visits are there to improve your score or allow you to clarify questions that reviewers had following their review of your application. It's not to catch you out or get you in a gotcha moment by any means. And it should be a way for you to really highlight and show a reviewer what you do. These review members, the committee members, are all community members who might be a volunteer, a board member, a donor, and a lot of them have joined boards or started volunteering for organizations following their site visits and become real champions for those organizations. So this is your opportunity to reach somebody who might not really have a full understanding of what you do in the community, and share that back with them. So we hope that it's as beneficial to you as it is to them. We understand that it's another hour of your time, but we really hope that there's a mutual gain for it. And usually those reviewers then come back to our funding decision meeting, and they really advocate for your organization, and share with reviewers why they think you should be raised up in funding. Next to that, we have the applications and scoring rubrics. So the rubric is listed right here. We highly recommend you have that pulled up while you're filling out your application, just so you are aware of what they're looking for there. And then there's a PDF of the application questions as well. As I mentioned before, our system's a little finicky. It doesn't auto-save. So a lot of folks prefer to download that, answer all the questions in a Word document, copy paste them in. Make sure you don't lose any of your work that way. So that's one option there, and those are just over here. This is where you're gonna go to find your application, and then down at the bottom we have FAQs. This training will be uploaded there with the slides, so if you want to look back at it, and then a couple of technical assistance issues with that system. This is a good place to go troubleshoot if you're having trouble uploading a document, or the word count isn't working properly. There might be an answer there. If there's not, or if you don't feel like looking there, feel free to reach out to me and Greg as well. And then the last thing I want to highlight on this page, anybody who received a grant last year, your grant report is due with your application so that reviewers can look at your grant report from last year alongside your application. There's a PDF and a Word version down here that you can download. It's just one question, really. It's let us know what you've done with the grant this year, or let us know what you want to share about your year. So that way we can have a little bit of understanding of where those funds went. It doesn't require receipts or anything complicated. And if you submit your application and haven't attached that, you can always email it to me or Greg, or if you've already sent it to me or Greg, I know a few folks have finished using their grant funds and already filled these out. Don't worry about it. We'll add it to your application. So you don't have to do that twice. This is kind of what I went through on the page, so I'm not gonna repeat it here. The only thing I guess I didn't touch on is grant decisions are going to be made in early September. And you should receive grants by mid-September per timelines. Now looking at the rubric, which was on that page there. As I've mentioned a couple times, it does tell you what questions they're looking at in the rubric. So this top one is looking at questions 13 to 16 in the application. The rubric itself hasn't changed except for the finance scoring. So all of these existing questions up top should be similar if you applied last year. One thing to note, if you're applying for a program grant, you will look at the red on the questions that have both. So for question 19, the program grants is in red, and that's because you're specifically talking about the audience and need of the program, not of your organization. So that's really the only difference on those. And then the finance rubric is going to be down here on the second page. And as I said, we updated this to add a little bit of clarity for everybody. One thing to keep in mind when you're thinking about this, your financial review is done by a separate committee than the narrative review. So these aren't the people who are coming to your site visits. This is a smaller committee that just looks at your finances, and they're really looking to see the financial health of your organization. It's made up of current and retired bankers, accountants, other financial experts. And then if they have questions, this is an area where we really don't want you to live or die by what you've submitted. So we'll follow up. If there's anything that is unclear to reviewers in the financial review that is concerning to them, we usually will follow up with a phone call or a meeting if needed. So it's 3 different categories. You have fiscal solvency. So really, how fiscally solvent are you? What does your cash reserves look like? What do your liquid assets look like? If something were to happen where you didn't get a grant next month, would you be okay? And would you be able to weather that? So it says just here that best practice recommends 3 to 9 months of cash on hand for a nonprofit. We understand that there may be reasons why you have more or less than that. There is a question on the application following the question on cash on hand saying, if your cash on hand is particularly low or particularly high, please explain. So if, for example, you have a lot of restricted funding and it's making your cash on hand look like you have 2 years of cash reserves sitting there, but it's all restricted for one program, you can explain that there. If your cash on hand looks really low, but your big fundraiser that brings in half of your budget for the year is next month, you can explain that there, just so that reviewers aren't shocked and like, well, it looks like you're going to shut your doors if your operations continue in this way for a full month. So that's kind of what they're looking for with fiscal solvency. Financial transparency, this is really how clear are your documents. This is where we're talking about, we harp on this a lot, I think, and sorry if it feels repetitive, but just making sure that everything's legible and clear and consistent. So your budget is matching your statement of financial activity, which is matching your P&L, like everything just should read across the same. So that our reviewers can follow it really easy, right? They're not familiar with your organization, so they want to make sure what they're seeing is consistent. The other thing is open up your PDFs and make sure that they're legible when you open them. A lot of times when you're converting an Excel document into a PDF, the page drops down here and you can't follow the numbers across. So it's really helpful for them. And if your finances are clear and concise and in order and consistent, it shows that you have a good understanding of your finances, which is part of the reason why financial transparency is important. So that's really what they're looking for in that part. And then, the other thing I would mention there too is both for fiscal solvency and financial transparency. If you get 4 different government grants, list them out rather than wrapping them up into one line that says government grant, because that will show that you have a diversity of income sources. And so if you lose one of those grants, you're not losing all of your funding. But if it looks like 90% of your budget is made up by one grant because you've wrapped it all up into one line on your budget, that can be a little concerning for reviewers. So we do want to see those diversified income sources, which I guess is also really the last point is what they're looking at is diversification of funding sources. They want to see that you're not funding everything through one funding source or two funding sources. You don't have one donor that if they go away, you won't be able to operate next year. I want to see that long-term stability. And then for program grants, you do have to add a program budget. So this last line is just for program grants, but we want to see same thing with your program budget, that you have a more than one income source for it. We don't want your program to be fully funded just by this one grant, because then if you don't get it, the program won't happen, and in future years you may not be able to run the program. And then clear list the expenses for that program, why it's going to cost what it will. Any questions on that updated rubric? I know that's a bit of a shift from what we've had in the past. We had kind of a one section finance score, and this won't be weighted heavier. It looks like it's going to be weighted like 3 times as heavy as the other page, because 3 questions on finance now instead of 1. This is still weighted as 1 question or 1 finance point. So this score will all kind of be wrapped up into 1 and weighted the same as any other line on the rubric.
So similar to, you know, breaking out government funding, you know, and listing multiple grants, is it preferable to do that with like foundations, special events? Do reviewers want to see that, you know, your money isn't all coming from one foundation, or is that specific to government?
If you have a number of different foundation donors, at some point it might be helpful just to list them out.
Okay.
And you can do it as a note too, if you don't feel like, if you feel like it's getting really long.
Okay.
You can say this is made up of 5 different foundation grants. Because yeah, I understand trying to keep it clear and concise as well. So it's kind of a balancing act. But yeah, just so that way they're aware.
And really quickly clarify program grants versus I guess general operating grants.
Yeah.
So would that be for a specific like
a specific program of an organization? So
it could be a one-time.
It can be a one-time program, or it can be an ongoing program. It doesn't have to be a new program. Programs we've seen apply in the past. Lift Up has applied for a program for their Rocket Pack program, right? Which is an ongoing program that they have to fund every year. It doesn't have to be a new program. And then we've had one-off programs that are different that get funded, like Strings did a North Route community charter school program where they were bringing music up to North Route. And they just were doing it that 1 year as a trial and seeing. And so kind of any type of program you want. And unfortunately, there's no like magic sauce on like the size of program you should be doing. But just the one thing we recommend thinking about if you're applying for a program grant is that the $10,000 grant you're applying for would be impactful for that program. So yeah.
Is it capped at 10? Is that the
okay?
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So we kind of talked about this already. It's kind of what's on the rubric. The other thing that we didn't really talk through as we walked through the rubric is the compliance piece that they're looking at, which is your IRS filings, your 990, your audits. Our finance director would be annoyed with me if I didn't say use your 990 as a marketing tool. It sounds bizarre to me as a person who doesn't read 990s for fun, but there are donors out there who do, and foundations who do, who are looking at that to understand what your organization does. And they want to see, and a lot of those donors that do that do it because they've had a bad experience before with an organization that wasn't compliant or had poor internal policies, internal governing policies. And so when they're looking at them, really, they are looking at your internal governing policies, your board makeup, and then your Schedule O, which is where Karen would say is your best place to market. And you tell your story. You could talk about the programs you offer, the services you offer, and really get into the mission and the why and all of that behind your work. So I know it sounds like something I wouldn't do, but there are people out there who do. So. And then a couple of best practices. I did kind of walk through this as we went through, but I'm going to hit on them again. Just clearly label each upload. The reviewers have 30 applications they're looking at. So have your nonprofit name, what the document is, if it's a 990, if it's a P&L, and then the year in your file name. So if your 2024 is your most recent 990, make sure that is listed in the file name. include everything that's requested on the questions. Question 24 in particular is one that trips people up. It asks for 2 different documents, your statement of financial position, which is a balance sheet if you're from the business world, and your statement of financial activity, which is a P&L, again, if you're from the business world. So make sure those are both included. We know you're merging PDFs there, so double check, open it up, and see that they're both there. If not, we'll just be following up and taking up more of your time. Open up all your PDFs, make sure you can read them. Don't include your Schedule B in your 990. That is the only part of that document that is not public. It is your donor list. And then lastly, explain discrepancies. As I mentioned with like adding a note to a document, if there's something in your budget that looks wildly different from last year, and you're going to have a reviewer looking at it and be like, wow, their budget doubled for, or this expense for rent doubled this year. What's happening there? Just put a note, explain, we moved into a larger space to be able to accommodate more clients, and we're covering it with this funding. Just so that way they're not guessing. So the more that they're guessing, the harder it is for them to understand what you're doing. The application. So we can walk through the application on the web portal. As I mentioned, it's finicky. So I showed you on the website where this is. It's just in the middle here. It's not this portal up top. We have a lot of folks who go there on accident. That's different. That's for our donors. You're welcome to look at it, but so if you click on it here, you get this apply here button. If you haven't logged into this portal before, it's pretty easy to set up an account. And then when you log in, it should bring you, should bring you to the page where you'll see the community grant cycle. And so if you've already started your application, you can continue with the application. If you haven't started, you can start a new application. If you're a grant writer and you're doing multiple grants, you can enter them all under the same account. So you can start a new application. I just recommend putting a little note to yourself on that application as to which organization it's for. You can also scroll across the top here and see my applications. And this is where if you had multiple of them, you could go through and review them. So if you go to start a new application, you'll get this pop-up. This is where you can put a note to yourself as a grant reviewer or a grant writer if you're writing multiple. Otherwise, you don't really need to do much there. Then you'll be brought to this screen, which is your eligibility screening. Make sure you read these because if you fill them out wrong, it'll tell you you can't apply for a grant. And then you'll get to this page. A little bit of guidelines on the top here. Each of these sections you'll have to click into and fill out separately. There's a percentage complete bar at the bottom for each. You have to fill out the general information first. You don't have to fill out all of it first, but you can. It's pretty easy. It's just like your organization name, EIN, things like that. But the thing you really do have to fill out first is the last question on here, which is question 12. Which is where you're saying which type of grant you're applying for. So if you're applying for a general operating grant, you need to select that there. If you're applying for a program grant, you need to say which type of program grant. So if you're applying for a program grant because you have a $1 million plus budget, if you're applying for a program grant because you're a faith-based organization, or for any other reason, and that is because this will change the questions in the rest of the application. So if you start filling out the next section and you haven't clicked through here, then you won't be filling out the right questions. So then these are the sections where your scored answers are going to be. The one recommendation that Greg always gives is if you're copy pasting, instead of copy pasting directly into here because it pulls some weird formatting, click on this up here. There's paste from Word. Paste as plain text. And if you paste from Word, you should get a little pop-up and you can paste it in here. And that'll strip all the formatting off so that it doesn't look weird for reviewers, you know, have odd line breaks or random bolded words. It also can correct any strange word count things that this system does, where it starts counting a bullet as a word. There is a lot of formatting you can do in here. We recommend keeping it pretty simple. Most of the reviewers are reviewing this in the portal, and it just doesn't work that well. It might look different to you than how it looks to them. So just kind of keep it simple. If you want to bold something, you certainly can, or underline, but I wouldn't use too much more beyond that. Another thing is down at the bottom here, you have your save, return to dashboard, and return to dashboard. As I mentioned, the system does not auto save. So if you put in an answer, I recommend scrolling down and hitting save, and then going up to do your next answer. The system also logs you out and doesn't tell you that you've been logged out. So if you're not hitting that save after each answer, you could be typing in 5 answers and then you go to click save and you've actually been logged out. So another reason we recommend working in Word or Google Docs and copy pasting in. And then if you just hit this return to dashboard, it will clear all of your work. So don't do that. The attachments, this is where all of your financial information is going to go. So your operating budget, the top 2 questions here, operating budget for your organization and your organizational budget look like the same question. The first one's just asking for the number, like what is the size of your annual operating budget? What are your total expenses for the year? The second one wants your actual budget document. So the PDF or Excel document that you're gonna add in here. The browse is kind of your cue there that you're gonna be adding a document. So if you go browse, should pop up. And then add them from your computer. We recommend working from a computer and uploading from your computer. If you're working from an iPad and you're working from the cloud, it doesn't seem to upload documents very well. If you're having issues with that, you can always send them to Greg and I, and we can upload them on the back end. So the other thing here is there's these little eyes, and those add a little bit of additional info beyond kind of what's written under the question. It's usually about formatting stuff. So if you're having challenges with things like that, that's a good place to check. And then this 27 is a question that we want to be really clear on. This is an optional additional information question. We don't want to see your annual report here or your impact report or a long document. As I mentioned before, our reviewers are volunteers. We do everything we can to respect their time. But if you have something that you think will add to your application and help reviewers understand what you do better, usually we recommend something visual here. So like something you can't already tell us with the words in your application. Say you have a graph of the population you serve that talks about like the income levels of the folks that you're reaching. Maybe you have a photo of the space that you work in that is specially designed to help people feel comfortable in it. Something like that, where you're showing beyond what your words have already communicated, then feel free to include it. This is not a mandatory question, so you don't have to add anything here. If you think that you can tell your narrative really well through your short answers to all of the other questions, great. But if there is something that you think will really help clarify that point, this is a good place to add it. If you do have longer documents that you are excited to share with reviewers, your site visit is a great place to do that because you have 1 hour with them one-on-one to show them. Like I talked to somebody yesterday who said, I have this cool video that we put together. I'd love to show it. And that is a great place to be like, and like, this is a video showing the impact of our work. So that's kind of what that question is for.
You do not want a video showing up in there.
I don't think you can put a video in there, unfortunately. It doesn't work. And then there's a couple optional questions here. How many hours did it take you to complete this application? Really trying to make this application short and easy. So hopefully, it doesn't take too many hours, but be honest here so that we have a good sense of that, because we're always trying to make it easier both for applicants and reviewers to get through these. And then how, if at all, did you use AI for this application? Scored. It just helps our reviewers understand how AI is being used so they're not guessing. So if they see answer that sounds particularly AI, and they scroll down and it's like, oh, I used AI and then I like cleaned up my answers, it's fine. It's not a ding against you or a point for you to use AI or not. We do recommend you use the tools that have been out for a long time regardless, like spell check and Grammarly. They, the reviewers are looking at a lot of applications. We tell them, this isn't everybody's full-time job, grant writing, but when you're reading a bunch of these and you're starting to see a lot of grammatical errors, sometimes they get frustrated with that. So use the tools that are out there for you. And then this is where you add your report on the previous year's grant. It is optional, so if you don't include it, it won't tell you that you haven't completed this section. But if you did receive a grant last year, it is mandatory. One thing on that report from last year is your grant funds can be used for 12 months. Obviously, you received them in September. If you received a grant from us last year, so we're not at the 1 year mark. So if you haven't used all of your grant funds, that is fine. You can give us an update as to where you are and when you plan to have them used by. Particularly for program grants, if it's a summer program that you're running this year and you haven't used them yet. For general operating, you have a sense of how much of them you've used and whether or not they'll be used by the end of the year. If not, if for whatever reason the program that you applied for last year couldn't get off the ground, there's been delays, you haven't been able to get permitting, whatever it may be, that's also okay. Just let us know in your grant report, and so that way we have a sense of where you're at, and we'll follow up if we have any questions. But your reviewers are going to see the grant report as well. So again, a good place to not copy paste. We know that the grant report question doesn't change, and if it's a general operating grant, what you're doing year over year may be similar, but you are all doing new things every year. So try to highlight what you've done in the last 12 months. So that way they can see what has happened and where you're going when they're looking at your application, which is talking about your future planning, and your report, which is talking about the last year of your operations. And then this is your declaration and compliance. One thing is some nonprofits require you have dual signatures on them. So if your organization requires that you have a secondary signer, there is a box in there to do that. If your organization does not require that, don't use it. The collaborator function on this is very finicky, and we're happy to walk you through it if you need to use it, but otherwise we recommend you not adding more people onto the application. You can share your login or have somebody review your answers in a Word document if you want to have somebody else on your team look them over. You can also, pretty sure, you hit preview application, yeah, you can print this, so you can print it as a PDF and share it with somebody on your team to look over if you want to get a second set of eyes on there. But that collaborator feature can make it so you can't submit your application sometimes. So unless you really need to use it, we recommend you don't. And then once you've filled out all of these sections, they should all be at 100%. They'll be at 100% before the optional questions are filled in. So you don't have to worry about that, but all of the required questions. And so then you can go up here to your final review and submit. If you're not complete, you'll get that. So make sure you don't get that pop up because it means you haven't submitted your application. But this should be pretty clear as to where you're at in it. Cool. Any questions?
Okay, so in the attachments portion, I've made this mistake in the past, so I just want to clarify. There's one of the attachments that says, attach your financials, audited if possible.
Yep.
So that is where you attach your audit or your audit and some financials, like I think just your audit.
Yeah.
Nothing else. Or if you don't get an audit, then
if you don't get an audit, you get to your financials, but if you have audited financials, you can put your audit. Yeah.
Okay.
Because honestly, the finance reviewers love looking at audited financials.
Right.
Even though again, it's longer than the other financials, but then they know that all the information they want is there.
Okay.
So yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
We've had some issues in the past compressing our audited financials small enough to upload.
Yeah.
In that case, can we send them to you?
Yeah, you can send them to me or Greg and we can compress them on our side. There's a couple tips on the website for how to compress them, but for whatever reason, they don't always work, those tips for people. And Greg has some fun little workarounds in his high-end Adobe that helps compress it even further. So yeah, if you're having any issues with uploads for any reason, don't spend, I've talked to people who are like, I just spent the last 6 hours trying to upload this. Don't do that. Please just email it to us and we'll figure it out. So yeah, so we don't want you to be spending your valuable time trying to upload a document. Got you out of here in less than an hour, just barely. Greg and I are your resource for this. We're your grant making team here. So Greg is the director of grant making. I'm grant making manager, and we're happy to answer any questions you have when it comes to grants. Not just the community grant cycle, but our other grant cycles as well as other grant cycles beyond us. So if you're applying to a grant with a front range funder and you want somebody else to look over an answer to a question, we look at grant applications all the time. So we're happy to spend a little bit of time for you in getting funding from other sources as well. We want to be a resource. And then in addition, the Bud Warner Library has a database of all Colorado grants, which is a great resource. If you have a library card, you get free access to it. So I highly recommend looking there if you're ever looking for additional grant funding. And then recently, what is it, Colorado? No. Communities Lead, Communities Thrive, CLCT. It's a new organization, which some of you may have received funding from us through the nonprofit infrastructure grants, MPI grants. So that organization is something that formed out of this coalition of people who tried to pull remaining COVID funding and get it out to support nonprofits with capacity grants. So that's the people who formed the organization, but now they are working on a lot of different projects, but one of them is coalescing all of the state grants available into one database. They have an actual person going through all, whatever, 30 state grant databases every 2 weeks. And updating this document. You can sign up for their newsletter and they'll send you the open grants. And it's a great way to get a consolidated list of state funding opportunities, which otherwise you'd be going to, all of these different sites to try to find, and it can be quite complicated. So highly recommend checking that out. It's on our website as well.
What was the name of it again? Sorry.
Communities Lead, Communities Thrive, CLCT. You do have to sign up to access it, but it's free. It's just, I think they are trying to build out a network of nonprofit contacts. Cool. Yeah. Great.
Thank you.
Thank you all for coming. Thank you.